curriculum stuff and say what is important. What concepts do you need to know now to get really cemented in your brain so that all the stuff that could be challenging actually makes sense. So these first bunch of slides, I want you to just look up here, listen, don't worry about taking notes, because everything we go through, we're going to go through again. So there'll be ample opportunity to take notes. And, haha, the best part, a bunch of this is a review from physics. So it should not all be brand new material. Here we go. Look at this. Thank you. I was going to do it. So very important to know when you're looking at lots of diagrams in manuals, looking at diagrams in your textbook, diving through the Gulfstream manual, unless it tells you otherwise. Airflow is going to be from the left to the right. And that's why I have this engine up here. Boom. Airflow coming in. Now, what happens in here is a whole other story. Don't worry about that yet. Because the reverse flow engine. But airflow left to right. So always think that that gives you orientation of what's happening. So we have, do you remember from physics, the name of this duct? Okay, together, yes. But just this one that's converging down. Oh, I'll drop you another one. What about the name of just this duct over here that's divergent? There you go. So we got convergent, converging together, divergent, diverging apart. And I'm going to ask you about airflow in just a minute, but if you have any trouble remembering those two names, on the wide part of this duct, if you connect the tip, and this is from Kurt, you get a C on convergent and a D on divergent. Isn't that nice? Thank you to Kurt. I know, and I saw him just. So, but you have to remember, your airflow is what direction? Very good. And what is happening, again, going back to physics, in a convergent duct, subsonic air, normal air, what is happening to the velocity? Excellent. It is increasing. So as it's getting squished together, it's like, I went out of here, yeah, off it goes. What is happening to pressure? It is lowering. It's like, oh, we're out. So pressure decreasing, velocity increasing. Now, subsonic airflow, what is happening in a divergent duct? Air, the velocity decreases, and pressure does what? Increases. So we have, should I confirm if you were right? Yes.
You go back to that slide.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things I want to mention to you guys is that in Bernoulli's principle, remember that term, Bernoulli? Okay, when we talk about pressure decreasing, velocity increasing, this is measuring in the duct, okay? Doesn't have anything to do with what's coming out. Because if we get an increase in velocity, which we get a decrease in pressure, what does that water feel like coming out of that nozzle? Really high impact, right? And you would tend to think, oh, that's a higher pressure compared to the water coming out of an open end. That's not the pressure we're measuring. The pressure, that's impact pressure of the actual exhaust. What we're measuring with pressure increase and decrease is going to be in the Bernoulli duct, right through here. So as the velocity decreases and the pressure increases, we'll be able to see that measured here, not here. Okay?
Thank you, Kurt.
Okay, quick question. So, how does the velocity increase with the pressure decreases?
By the area.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, if you got a set mass flow of air, because we're always gonna be dealing with air, and that's the fluid. If you have a set flow, let's say so many pounds per second, right? And as that's moving through here, when it goes to a divergent duct, the velocity will actually increase, or the velocity will decrease, but the pressure in this area will increase. Okay? And then if we actually take a nozzle of a jet engine and go like this, yeah, we're getting a decrease in pressure and an increase in velocity, but that increase in velocity coming out into the atmosphere is a jet nozzle that causes the aircraft to go forward. Just want to throw that between Bernoulli's principle and the actual impact of the air coming out into the ambient. Okay? You kind of see that?
And you'll see also, we'll talk more about this later, that it's kind of an energy exchange. Like, you get pressure or you get velocity. We'll talk more about it later. So, velocity increase as pressure decreases, or velocity decreases as pressure increases. Any questions?
Please know that, because what we're
Yes.
reviewing right now is through the entire turbine engine, from front to back.
Anyone, yeah, anyone have any question or want me to go over anything again? Okay. So, what happens when this air goes supersonic? What happens with velocity and pressure in a convergent duct?
Yeah, opposite.
Excellent. Yes, just the opposite. So, if you get this cemented in your head, then when we talk about supersonic, you just flip it. And they can do super cool stuff by putting ducts together on either a supersonic inlet where they want to slow air down, or make air supersonic out and exhaust. We have a whole class on induction and a whole other class on exhaust, so we'll really dive into this stuff. But here we have a convergent section. So we have high pressure, low velocity gases coming in, and as they come through this convergent section, subsonic, what's happening to velocity and pressure? What's happening to velocity?
It increases.
Increases, what happens to pressure? And then we hit this restriction, we reach Mach 1. Now we have a divergent duct, supersonic air. So now we have, and it's up here, but what happens to pressure for supersonic? Very good. And velocity? Yes. I think I heard it right. Pressure decreasing, velocity increasing because it's supersonic. And then you get out the back. Yes, Mark.
So even though it's divergent, you're basically whatever's happening in the throat keeps going.
So we basically, this correct, we have a shock wave here, but now that air is becoming supersonic, so we're using a divergent duct to increase the velocity of the supersonic air.
If you put that in the application, if you turn that rotator at 90 degrees, so the red is on top and the blue is at the bottom, you're looking at a rocket engine right there.
Okay, so
So-
the change and include the changeover.
Magic. So air at that, it's becoming, I might throw this to Kurt. It's getting, it changes its form kind of. It becomes more like a non-compressible gas or fluid at that magic number. Now, that number fluctuates because it depends on air density and temperature and all that stuff. But they've done tons of experiments and they see, okay, when I accelerate this quantity of air, it starts to, yeah, stuff happens and it becomes incompressible, basically. That's-
Let me see if I can expound on that a little bit. When we're dealing with high-speed aerodynamics, supersonic airflow, the one thing that you have to remember is no jet engine can have supersonic airflow through it. Okay, every jet engine, even if it's doing Mach 2, the engine itself has subsonic air flowing through it. So they use convergent divergent ducts and shock waves to control the air going through the engine. So even though you have supersonic velocity coming out of the tailpipe to push an aircraft Mach 2, all of the air going through the engine is subsonic. Supersonic air going through a turbine engine is destroyed. Okay? So this is just getting a taste of just what they call a seed duct, like very common on a rocket engine, and how you can take subsonic air, push it through a float, a different type of duct, and get supersonic, like in a rocket engine coming out. Now, I think we're going to cover high-speed aerodynamics a little bit later,
Yeah.
but this is just getting a high-level overview of the seed ducts. But what we want to remember is right now we want to, like Christina said, cement it in your head for subsonic aircraft. Convergent, divergent, pressure stuff. Just get everything subsonic airflow. But the engine will always be subsonic.
We're about to dive into an actual engine. Again, it'll be high-level overview, but any questions on, yeah, this is where it's going from subsonic to supersonic. So that's when pressure and velocity act the opposite of what they would in subsonic. So this is where that change from subsonic to supersonic air happens. Is that what? Right, velocity is changing. Yeah. Yeah. So this is, the colors are just to show this is subsonic air, and then we're at the speed of sound, and now we're supersonic, is what that's showing. Does that answer your question?
Had kind of the same question with that, where it's like, so at the beginning of the stroke, we're starting to increase its velocity, and because it's becoming supersonic, that velocity is just continuing to increase as opposed to what it would do normally, which would decrease in a non-supersonic.
So it'll continue to increase till it hits speed of sound. At that, and this is all engineered, at that point, that's when the duct changes.
That's correct, because you have a large amount of pressure coming into the subsonic side. And that large amount of pressure
a combustion chamber, and a turbine that drives the compressor. So those are 3 parts. Right now, start cementing them in your mind. Compressor, combustion, and turbine. We're going to dive deep into each one of those areas, but just the 3 parts for now. Now, think about this. What do you think is happening to air as we go through the compressor section? It's getting compressed, and the compressors are squeezing it down. Here's just a little tidbit I'm going to throw out there. There are the compressor that is turning, and we have stationary stator vanes. These little vanes act as little divergent ducts. So that is helping to build and increase pressure as the air flows through the compressor section. Now you should be able to figure this out. What kind of duct is right there? What is happening to pressure? Increasing. So right here, so this is the end of our compressor section going into what section? Combustion. So at the outlet of the compressor, or you may hear inlet of the combustion or burner section, you might hear it called, is the greatest pressure in our turbine engine. That is something you're going to be quizzed on, tested on. You need to know outlet of the compressor or inlet of the burner at this same area is our highest pressure.
What do we call that? That point of highest pressure, what do we call that?
There, our diffuser section, yes, because it is diffuser. So 3 terms: diffuser, outlet of compressor, inlet of combustion. Thank you.
So, the divergent nature of the stator vanes is enough to overcome the conversion of the compressor section?
We're going to talk in depth about that. Did you have any?
No, it can kind of fool you, because when you look at
Right.
the whole area space of the air going through the compressor, that whole area is a convergent duct, right? But every stage of a rotor and stator is a divergent duct to increase the pressure. So you've got kind of a flow going through there, which kind of increases the velocity by shape of the compressor area, and each individual blade is divergent. So what it does, it gives you a high point of pressure, and it balances out the velocity. So it's very stable and gives you a constant pressure at the diffuser. This is called a constant pressure engine.
Yeah.
That's the rate section, constant pressure engine.
Is that because you're basically wanting to compress, not necessarily measure the velocity in that stage?
Right. Your goal is compressing air, building pressure to give it to the burner section. So going back here to our exhaust, what kind of duct is this? And what is that doing to that exhaust gas?
Increasing pressure,
Increasing the velocity. So, like Kirk said, this is known as the Brayton cycle. In our next section of slides, we're going to go deeper into Brayton versus Otto cycle. But I'll throw this out here. We've got compression, intake, compression, combustion, exhaust, all happening at the same time. So constant pressure cycle we're going to give a very brief overview of, super brief, how they're done. Great. Okay.
Oh, hey, one last term that's on the slide,
Oh.
the code section, hot
Yes,
section.
yes. So code section we have is the compressor section that's before or have any burning, any fire going on. And we'll talk later, this is where we pull bleed air off for all our accessories. I know Ryan's talked about it, a bunch of your other classes using compressor bleed air because it's relatively cool compared to the hot section, which is our combustion and turbine and exhaust. So those are two sections I'll be referring to. Cold section, compressors, hot section, combustion, turbine, exhaust.
Is the diffuser part of one or two, or is it in
Cold.
Cold section, because we're not at the burner yet.
But don't be fooled, because the air coming off the diffuser, or even at the very last stage of the compressor, is very hot. And, you know, we're talking 400, 500 degrees, but it's a lot cooler than everything that's happening in the
Yeah.
combustion on. So that's why they call it cold section.
Any questions before we start diving into the curriculum? Or anything you have started? Okay, so just put that, hold that in a place in your brain so it doesn't fall out. Okay, so we're going to start with some turbine engine development history, which is pretty cool, and then types of engines. So what never ceases to amaze me, even though we as humans have a ton of ingenuity, God comes up with stuff first. So God made the first jet engine when he made a squid, which is so cool. So a squid actually propels itself through the water by jet reaction. So it takes in water and then spews it out. So this action causes the reaction that he can move through the water. So if you start to get boggled by jet engines as we start going through it, you're like, well, actually, God came up with it first. God gave me a mind that I can use, and I can use it on understanding turbines. So there's your encouragement. Hero was a fellow, they say he was of Greek origin, lived about 10 to 70 AD, and he came up with this Eola tale. I said that right. So it is one of the earliest accounts of reaction principle, and they would have water in here that day and age. And they said it had about 1,000 pounds of thrust. Now, fortunately, depending where you're from, Heinkel made the Heinkel HE-178, and he was a German individual, and his country gave him much support and many dollars. And so it was the first purely jet-propelled flight in history. The Germans won. Then we got the Bell P-59 Aerocomet. The British were further along in jet engine development, and they donated an engine for the United States to copy in 1941. That became the basis for General Electric jet used by the P-59 a year later. Some interesting backstory. It was a single-seat twin jet fighter, and the British developed it. The United States is like, we don't like the performance. We can do better, but they used it for training. After World War II, they took all that technology and now they could apply it to commercial aircraft development. So the British tested the first turboprop-powered passenger liner in 1948, the Vickers Viscount. And you should be familiar with this one. They also, man, the British are just so good at doing stuff. They tested the first turbojet. Now we're going to talk about what is turboprop, turbojet, all that. We're going to talk about that. Don't worry about that. The de Havilland Comet in 1949. And then it was grounded. Ooh, sheet metal class. Anybody remember the specific reason? And what was too close to the square window? Excellent. What kind of rivet? Yeah. Beautiful. Flush rivets. Too deep, too close to the stress concentration of the square window. Man, y'all get it. Extra points today. And then along comes the United States saying, oh, okay, everybody has really good ideas. Boeing invested 1/4 of their net worth into the Boeing 707 that went into service in 1958. Then they said, I think we can go even faster, and started developing supersonic airliners. Now, the French want to hop on board, so the French partnership with the British built and placed into service in 1976. 16 smaller supersonic jet liners named the Concorde. Powered by 4 Rolls-Royce turbojet engines, 100-passenger aircraft capable of flying 2.2 times the speed of sound. But, anyone know why they're not flying today? They crashed one, which has
they would say, I saw a gorilla piloting an aircraft going way faster than any propeller aircraft has ever gone before. And then the military can just claim, oh, this guy is crazy. He's nuts. He doesn't know what he's talking about. There's no such thing as planes going that fast.
Oh, no.
They used to do that when they were first testing jet aircraft. I don't think they get away with that now.
I feel like a wooden propeller would allow you.
Free spinning.
Yeah, because that's directed to your problem.
Because then it looks like there's a problem in the front, so they can't say it was just flying back.
Yeah,
Pretty
it's got a
interesting.
backstory.
I'm keeping it. Unless you need it back. Unless you want it back.
Thank you for blowing up.
Oh, they flew out of here, and then they
Blew out windows. That's why.
yeah, that's how. So these aren't me. It's like
Hmm?
are these linked?
Nope, which is the coolest part of it. Because power, compressor turbines turn with the compressor. So once you have a roll, this has so much force and velocity, that's what turns it.
Do that.
Still, don't ever do this, but theoretically, you could go up to a PP600 and grab the prop, have compressor and scream in full speed,
Yeah.
and you can hold the prop. Now, when you let go, you get decapitated.
That's crazy.
Yep.
So then, so you're getting air compressed here, and then it's flowing through here, and then in this way, right? And then how it flows out.
So,
Is that the direction of the flow?
diffusers are where it's really building high pressure.
Okay.
You go into the burner section.
Yep.
Where question's happening,
Air flow coming here.
and then coming and hitting this.
So then why does it
Actually, totally hitting
coming through the backside?
through the guide vane into the compressor.
just moves there.
Correct.
That's all it's about.
So yeah, this kind of, it's not real drastic, but it mirrors.
That's what I went over to Kirk was like, so it's basically doing like boom, 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 boom 1,000 times. And I was like, I see the little spots like in the blades. I'm like, where's that located at? I was wondering. This is what those are.
So your fuel is here, but where's your, like,
So these are stators and these are the rotor actually.
The igniter.
these would be your ignite. Well, no, these would be your fuel.
You'll see on other ones.
Probably right here.
Missing.
Alright, are we waiting?
Alright.
Okay.
So these are the rotors.
Oh, so that goes
We'll
on
get
there.
back to
The blades are the rotors.
Yes.
And then
Yes. The turning ones are the rotors. Yeah.
the
The stator, the station.
that's just like a generator bobber.
Dude, I thought that was gonna, that is.
Michael, CQA.
Alright, that's bobber.
They had us different heads. It's got drill heads, it's got a knife head, that just becomes. I guarantee you. Because you're gonna use them. You know which ones you use the most.
Just need to, you gotta down to like, yeah, he's gotta save all his receipts and be like, you gotta save all his receipts and then just time to use, you're like, alright, this is.
I used this, I didn't use that.
Alright, time to get started. Is everybody back? Talk about. Okay, so we have. Do I have everyone's attention? Thank you. A definition of a jet engine. A reaction engine, so what does that mean? Excellent. There's law, equal, and opposite reaction. Which derives its thrust from the acceleration of an air mass through an orifice or the whole space opening of the engine. Now here's something you need to know, not be familiar with, because some of these we're not going to go into any more depth. So for common types of jet engines, we have a rocket, ramjet, pulse jet, and then, woohoo, what's up here? It's a convergent divergent duct. So exactly what Kirk was talking about on a rocket engine or motor, you will have the CV, convergent divergent duct, to get that incredible reaction to propel the rocket to space. A ramjet, this is an air-breathing engine, but it has no moving parts. There's no compressor to draw in air, so it has to be moving forward to have enough forward velocity to generate thrust. So it's limited basically to special military weapons delivery systems. But air comes in as you propel out through, got fuel, igniter, combustion chamber, and then exhaust. Pulse jet, this is a little more efficient than ramjets, but it has these special little shutter valves, so air comes in. As combustion happens and expands that air, it shuts these little valves so it has more thrust out the back as that pressure drops and opens up to allow more air in. And it sounds, those valves are opening and closing so fast, it's sort of a buzzing sound, so it's also called a buzz jet. Have a video. Let's see if she wants to say nicely.
Hey, sweetie, how about some?
So these are the kinds of things, if things ever get worse or you're someplace else and you hear that noise, you should probably run and hide. That's your survival information for today.
As it's closing, it's providing more pressure.
Right. Yes. Yep. Yeah, when they're closed, all that, there's nothing, more pressure building up to give more thrust. That was a lunar Argus pulse jet. So, gas turbine. What are the three components every gas turbine will have? Give me one.
Compressor.
Excellent. Give me another one. And the last one? Turbine. Very good. So compressor, combustor, turbine. Using a gaseous fluid as a working medium, and it's going to produce either shaft horsepower or jet thrust, or maybe both. Now, this is something you for sure need to know. Oh, and you can be taking notes now. I forgot to say that. You can start looking at this. So we talked about the 4 jet engines. Now we're talking about types of gas turbines. For the whole rest of the class, sorry, we're not going to talk about rockets anymore, are all types of gas turbines. We're going to talk about turbo jets, turbo fans, turboprops, my favorite, and turbo shafts. So those are 4 you need to be familiar with how they are different, which we're going to talk about. So I'm going to show you a picture of a turbo fan before we talk about some of the differences of those 4, and you'll see why. So turbofan is that fan, some of the fan air bypasses the core of the engine. And the reason for this, we're going to talk a whole lot more about these. Just a pure jet engine, which is just this part, is good at high altitude. If we gear a prop on here, like PP6, props are good at low altitude, but with the turbo fan, that has good efficiency at all altitudes. So they made the best of both worlds. So looking at our 4 gas turbine engine types, a turbo jet engine, which I have a picture on the next slide, is just the basic turbine. You just got compressor, combustion, turbine, and then exhaust. Turbofan is the one we just looked at, put a big old fan on the front. Those are further classed into if you have low, medium, or high bypass. I'm going to talk about those differences. And then turboprop, just like it says, the turbine drives the propeller, like on our PP6. Turbo shaft are used for helicopters and APUs. So that's our 4 different types. Those 4 can be put into 2 groups. So a turbojet and turbofan would both be classified as thrust producing engines. Because everything making them go forward is all about thrust. Turboprop and turboshaft are called torque producing engines because that shaft is going to drive something, whether it's propeller or geared to transmission to helicopter rotor or something that's not just the thrust going up the back. So thrust producing versus torque producing. Any questions on those 4? Here is a J79 turbojet example. So, nice and simple. What is this section? And it's a little hard to see, but what would be turning right back in here? Turbines, and then we have exhaust. So everything going straight through, no air bypassing anywhere, all the air is going through the core of the engine. And also, it is all what's called axial flow. So all the air is flowing along this axis. We're going to talk about centrifugal flow later. And, I have written in my notes a crook story for the F4 Phantom. Flies faster than the F-14 Tomcat, not as maneuverable, and something about busted canopies on golden A6s and a flyover.
I don't know if they want to do that story.
Just a story.
Story, yeah, I included this in my past classes, but the F4 Phantom, straight out, compared to an F-14 Tomcat, the F4 is actually faster, but not near as maneuverable. So when I was on my first deployment, I was on the USS Coral Sea, and we had F4 Phantoms, we didn't have the Tomcats, and a bunch of other aircraft too. Well, one of the aircraft even today that we have on the carriers is what they call the golden A6s. And it's an A6 intruder that carries big electronic warfare pods underneath the wings. It's driven by a propeller, creates a tremendous amount of energy, and they can do electronic warfare with it by putting out huge electromagnetic radiation and blackout cities and things like this. To protect the pilot, they have a thin layer of gold in the canopy so that it supersonic pass, the shock wave comes down so far. It's less than that much. That's on the F4, that's the J79 there. Pushes that with the afterburner.
Thanks, Kurt. So, I don't know. Turboprops are my favorite, but I don't know that you can top that. Like, that's crazy cool. But turboprops is simply a gas turbine engine that delivers power to a propeller. So I threw this slide in here, some of my favorites. So just to familiarize all of you, especially that are interested in missions. So Samaritan's Purse donated quite a few, I forget if it's 2 or 3 King Airs to Pacific Mission Aviation. I don't know if they'll have the rep come here or not. So Ryan saw my slides and he noticed this is a King Air 200 and it got dual gear down here. This is actually can carry over 13,000 pounds. So anybody remember reg was required? Exactly. So what should this aircraft based on that be required to have? 2 pilots. But this one has special certification that it can be single pilot blimp. So there's some trivia for that. Then we've got MAF. Now, MAF is coming Monday with our Kodiak, but I had Ethnos 360's Kodiak, so I gave MAF's PC-12. And then JARS also has Kodiaks, but one of their signature aircraft is the Pilatus Porter P6. Yeah. All the PCs and the PTs get mixed up in my brain. And then Caravan, Cessna Caravan. Now they can have a PT6 engine, or they can have a Garrett engine also. Talk later about how you can tell the difference. But turboprops, especially the PT6, heavily used in missions. So when JARS comes later, they'll probably talk about doing a PT6 heavy maintenance course, making it available to you after graduation. Keep on the alert because that's what course to take. So turboprop example, we have, and here's where things can get a little tricky. But we still have our compressor section and our combustion section and our turbine. Anybody notice something a little different about the setup of this engine? Backwards. Yes. So PT6 is known as a reverse flow engine. Air comes in the back, gets compressed, goes into the burner section, and again, reverses. Don't worry about this, we'll talk about it later. Goes over the turbines and out the exhaust. And the way it's designed makes it more compact for smaller aircraft. But our turbine then is what drives, it's geared down at least 15 to 1, our propeller. Yes.
I was gonna ask, is there an issue with these where the exhaust, it seems like the exhaust would then flow into the air intake?
That's a very good thought. If you look at the King Air, you'll see how they're very separated. So like the intake will be, now different aircraft will be arranged a little bit different, but on our King Air, intake's down here and then exhaust is up, out, aimed out the back. So it looks like the intake duct comes up here. It's not that it's only taking in air, it's going through a duct.
Maybe this would be a good time to interject something on here. What you're looking at is how the exhaust is escaping the actual engine itself, but the airframe manufacturer is gonna design an exhaust pipe
Yeah.
that would bolt to the engine, and it'll curve it at. But at this point, anytime that you have an exhaust that bolts to the engine, that's always an airframe part, not an engine part. Just remember that going forward, that any aircraft, the exhaust is always part of the airframe. So if you look up, if you wanted to purchase a new exhaust pipe, you go to the airframe IPC and
section again, compressor and combustion, and then our power section with the turbine. So still have those sections, even though it might look kind of flip-flop. And then the turbo shaft, and this would be for helicopters. Again, we have now, flip back the other way, inlet coming in through our compressor. This one has some reverse flow in the burner combustion section, but still going out, powering our turbine, which, now this is cool, this shaft will run through the compressor shaft, going and giving power to whatever, if we're going to a helicopter rotor, whatever that runs for. But we still have our power section and our combustion, I lost my word. Power section and gas generator section. So power and gas generator section. So it's going to look a little bit different on different engines, but it still contains the same components. Now, back to the turbo fan. So we have multi-bladed fan, or fans on the front of the compressor section. And this is a really nice visual. You can see some of our air is going to go through our compressors and our burner and our turbines. And some of the air is going to go just through the fan, bypassing the core of the engine. And this, I think I said it before, but takes the best of both worlds of the turboprop for low altitude operations and a pure jet engine for high altitude operations. And they have excellent fuel efficiency, so this is what is used predominantly on airliners today, is the turbo fan. Any questions on it? Yes.
What determines if it's a low, medium, or high level?
We're going to talk about that. We got the information.
So with the turboprop, you're not, you don't really care about the thrust then, because it gets routed so far everywhere.
It's, on the PT6, it's relatively little thrust that's coming out of the exhaust. So, you can have back to turbo fans, unless you have any other questions. Bless you. So you can have the fan, typically, it's going to be mounted at the inlet, but you can have them mounted on the back of the engine as well. I didn't put a picture in here, but if you ever come across them, they're kind of wacky looking. But just know you can have an aft-mounted turbo fan. Now, this does not help with compression of the air at the inlet like this one does, so that's why they're not used all that much. I think I'll talk about it later, but it's on my mind right now. So, what do you think having your fan out here, how will that help with what's going on in here? Not sure about cooling, yes. And what's something else on a pure turbojet that cool airflow on the outside of the core will help with? Those of you that have been to an air show and had the Blue Angels do a low pass over you, what's something everybody's like, oh no, it's so loud. So having this blanket of cool air actually helps with the sound. It makes it quiet. And I think I'm talking about that later, but just throw that in there. Now, we're going to talk about some terms that are very important. You need to understand, be familiar core exhaust. Bypass ratio is the ratio of incoming air that bypasses the core compared to the amount of air that goes through the core. And then fan pressure ratio, the ratio of ratio air pressure leaving the fan compared to pressure entering the fan. I'll let you all finish writing down the definition.
What's the next slide?
So the next one, I threw in a visual of this,
Okay, good.
and then we'll go into a low bypass. And I will be posting these slides on Moodle. All right, anybody need any more time on this one? So here is the visual I came up with. If it helps you, great. If not, it's okay. But our bypass is how much air is bypassing the core compared to how much is going through the core. And then our thrust is fan thrust, which would be on both sides, compared to core thrust. And fan pressure ratio is the pressure of coming out of the fan compared to a pressure going in. Any questions on those ratios?
So just to give you a visual on the numbers, let's say for instance, let's say 1/5 of the air is going through the fan, and then 4/5 of the air is going through the core. So that would be like 20%, right? Going through the fan, 80% going through the core. So that would be your difference between a bypass ratio, in there. And there's really good stuff. I would say when you get a chance, go back and read your textbook because it'll really reinforce this. And there's some good stuff when you're talking about, like the percentages for like bypass ratios and things like that. You're going to need it too, especially when it comes to testing, maybe even more morals and things like that. But the one you're going to be doing the most probably is going to be bypass ratio. So just get an idea of that. That's just how much air is going through the core compared to how much is actually being bypassed. And so a higher bypass ratio, more air going through the fan out there for great low speed operations, low altitude operations, carry heavy loads like airliners. Set up on top, the fan doesn't do very much. It's all from that little bit of a core that's pushing the aircraft forward and purifying the air. So turbofans is great, even on military aircraft now, because now you have extra air that can be mixed into the afterburner.
Yes.
Yes.
Does that ratio change then, based on the engine's like altitude, or is it that one engine will have a set bypass ratio?
Yes, that one, because it's all based on the manufacturer. If you look at one of those high bypass fans on an airliner, that's manufactured that way.
That was basically the same, like where it gets adjustable. It sounds like it's set.
Yeah. So here's kind of going into that. We can have low bypass, which would be just a 1-to-1, so equal parts on the fan as what's going through the core. 4 parts bypassing to 1 part going through the core would be high bypass. So that's how it's broken up into those 3 categories. So air mass, we talked a little bit about this, is measured in pounds. And here's some trivia. About 250 to 300 pounds of air per second is typically consumed by some of these engines. So that means a 14-foot cube contains 1 foot of air, or 1 pound of air. 1 pound of air in a 14-foot cube. So stay away from these inlets, because it will hurt you.
So high bypass is good for high altitude or low?
High bypass, well,
Say again?
high bypass, he's asking, is it better for high or low altitude?
A high bypass is great for both low and high.
Right.
So the greater number is referring to the bypass?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
25% is going through the core with a high bypass.
Correct.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, no, I'm just making sure.
Yes.
That's right.
That's good. Yeah. Or, is this right in thinking the higher the bypass, the bigger your fan? Because you have more going around.
The size of the cube, like the 14-foot cube, that's
So
gonna
the price
vary
sea
on,
level,
that's gonna vary on like altitude, density,
Correct.
all the above.
yeah, but that's probably like sea level, standard day, pressure, all that.
So I want to expound on that pounds of air
Yeah.
per second. That's the mass airflow going through an engine. A lot of the engines will be 250, 300, 350 at full power will consume, let's say for instance, 300 pounds of air per second. And she already mentioned about the square for a pound of air. So in other words, in 1 second, it can consume the air out of this room. At full power of these engines. So the suction that these engines have are so incredible. You have to obey the safety zones on these. Absolutely obey the safety zones as they're laid out in the maintenance manuals, telling you what the safety zones are. At full power, you're gonna wanna stay away 25, 30 feet away from the inlet, because this, the amount of air that comes in there, measured in pounds per second is amazing. So, and of course, what's shooting out the back is all velocities.
Any questions on this differentiation? So example of a low bypass, and again, that's just 1-to-1 ratio. So equal parts bypassing as it's going through the core. And you can have it ducted off, or you can run this fan air along the engine for the reasons I was jumping ahead of myself here. So if you have a full fan duct, which means it goes along the core of the engine, that reduces aerodynamic drag because you don't have this fan portion duct stopping right here. Reduces noise emissions because that cooler air is attenuating, or yeah, with the way that sound works, it's making it quieter. And you already mentioned it helps with engine cooling, because this air is much cooler than what's going on inside of the core. And an example, if we have 160 pounds per second on a 1-to-1 bypass of fan air, the core is going to be exactly the same, 160 pounds per second. Then high bypass turbofan, it can be, it has to be at least 4-to-1, but there are ones that are up to 9-to-1 on air bypassing around the core. So this is a good example of, we're going to just know these are turning separately from one another. So, what is fan pressure ratio? Very nice. Pressure leaving the fan compared to pressure going into the fan. Right there, we got it. Ratio of air pressure leaving the fan to the air pressure entering the fan. And that ratio, it depends on the aspect ratio of the fan blades. What is aspect ratio? Uh-oh. We got it over here. Cord to the fan. Yep, so the width to the length. And what would be a high aspect ratio? Longitude. Yep. So, aspect ratio, ratio of the blade's length to its width or chord. And a long blade with a narrow chord has a higher aspect ratio. Short blade with a wide chord has a lower aspect ratio. What you need to know for fan pressure ratios is a high aspect ratio will give a high fan pressure ratio. So a low bypass fan typically will have 1.5 to 1 fan pressure ratio. So how much pressure is coming in or going out compared to what's at the inlet. And a high bypass fan can have as much as 7 times coming out the back of the fan compared to what's going in the front of the fan. Any questions on that? A curious thing that they've done years ago, but now they're trying to do it again, and we'll talk about this more in depth in propeller class. But they do have unducted fan engines. So here we have our fan on the back, and new engine designs with higher efficiencies than most engines in use are designated as ultra high bypass or UHB prop fan and unducted fan. So we have no duct around this, it's just out there in open air. And they have propellers made from composites with blades that are 12 to 15 feet in diameter. So these things are massive. And they are surpassing high bypass turbofans in fuel efficiency by 15 to 20%. And they've achieved 30 to 1 bypass ratio. Now they're still working out a lot of issues with these, but they got them working. Pretty cool stuff. How do you go about selecting a power plant for your airframe? So, it's going to depend on cruise speed requirements and what are you using the aircraft for. So here we go, recip versus turbo shaft. I'm turbine all the way, actually not all the way, there's some recips that are cool. But today's light aircraft that have a cruising speed of 250 miles per hour or less would most likely utilize a reciprocating engine because, I hate to say it, but they do cost less and they're less expensive to maintain, so there's that. But a rotor craft, we got this cool dude here, would more likely use a turbo shaft because of the low weight to power ratio. So an example, Honeywell T55 turbo shaft on the Chinook helicopter produces 4,800 shaft horsepower formerly known as Garrett, and I'll probably slip up and refer to them as Garrett. But Honeywell has the TPE 331 turboprop, weighs 360 pounds, and produces 1,040 shop horsepower, and has 2.8 to 1 power to weight ratio. Once you get beyond 450 mile per hour requirement, then you use turbojet or turbofan. Turbofan, it's newer and is most popular for commercial and business jets. And as Kirk mentioned, also military, because with the fan you can have all kinds of afterburner stuff going on. And turbojet engine is less efficient, and for all practical purposes you can think of it as being replaced by the turbofan. And this is just a chart to compare piston engine, turboprop, turbofan, turbojet, and here we have our thrust, over here increasing airspeed. So as airspeed increases, piston engine falls off, boom, not good. Turboprop, not so bad, but then we start to fall down. Turbojet, pretty decent, but you can see very much lower than turbofan for lower airspeeds. Turbofan, best of all the world. So, you don't have to memorize that chart or anything, but just to show comparison. Rating, do you have questions? Rating the power output of a gas turbine engine. And again, remember the term is a reaction engine. Produces power by the force of reaction. Thrust is expressed in pounds. And jet engine power output is rated in pounds of thrust. The manufacturer usually determines that rating, and they operate the engine in a special test cell to do all of their calculations accurately.
Can I get a visual of that too, when you're measuring pounds of thrust? Because just imagine if you had a great big, like a floor scale in your bathroom. Let's say you had a great big one right behind the engine, and it's measuring the impact of the velocity of the thrust hitting that scale. And that's what you'd be measuring, is the pounds of thrust, the weight of that air coming out.
I love that visual. So here's just an example of, yes.
For that measure, is that being done at a specific distance from the engine? Is there standards for that?
I'm sorry, say again?
Is that typically done at a specific distance from the exhaust of the engine? Or is that?
However, the test cells, I'm not sure how the test cells are set up, but it's gonna be something that's probably relatively close, that they can do. They also have all of the engineering data now, where they can do a lot of it mathematically by measuring just how much air is coming into the engine, how much air is going out of the engine, and what velocity it's being moved at. Then they can use formulas to figure out the thrust. But if you want to get a visual of the thrust, just imagine a scale that the thrust is impacting against. That's what it is, it's the force
altitude, piston engines pretty quickly die off. Now, you can do turbochargers and stuff, but they still are very limited, unlike gas turbines. Any questions on what we have covered so far?
Can you remind me why the turbofan ducting air around it helps? Because that make it more efficient, you said, right?
Yeah. Having that thrust produced by the fan coming out the back, it's like taking a propeller, and a propeller is very efficient at low altitudes. Straight turbojet is very efficient at high altitude. So you have the efficiency of the fan at low altitudes and the efficiency of the core at high altitude.
Okay.
So then,
Can I add to that?
yes.
Sure. One of the things that you're gonna hear, probably you're gonna read this in the textbook too, is that when we start dealing with, like a fan, a turbo fan, or a propeller, if you kinda equate those to the two, what you're doing is you're taking a relatively, large mass of air and moving it at a slower speed. That's what a propeller does. It takes a large mass of air and moves it at a slower speed. You get a lot of power out of that. Whereas your engine will take a smaller mass of air and move it at a high speed. That is more efficient at high altitude. The propeller is more efficient at low altitude because the air is heavy, dense. So with that big propeller grabbing that air and throwing it rearward, you get a lot of power out of that. So by combining a turbofan with a fan and a core jet engine, you can have the fan be very efficient at low altitude by grabbing that dense air and throwing it back, kind of similar to a propeller. And then when you get up to altitude, you've got your core jet engine that's accelerating the air very quickly. You know, smaller mass of air but high velocity, and that's really great for high altitude. Because when you're up at high altitude, think about it, there's very less drag on the airframe. The air's rarefied, not much up there, so you don't need much to push the aircraft forward. So a small core jet engine works really well at high altitude. But boy, when you start coming down to low altitude, having that fan grabbing that air and moving it rearward gives you a lot of thrust down low. So it's the combination.
Might be getting a little too technical, but is there any engines where it's kind of designed to be able to change that ratio at all, or something that opens up at higher altitude and funnels more into the jet and closes at low altitude?
Not that I know of. No.
What generally is the difference between thrust that you're being put down to
At low altitude, you can get a lot of thrust up in the air. At high altitude, you're not gonna get much at all, because there's just not much air to move up there from the fan. But what air you are bringing in, dumping fuel, expanding it, shooting out the back, will give you the velocity that explains it. I think, you know, just want to get a visual of that, what's happening, you'll get a good understanding. Yes?
So for airliners, then how would the high bypass or higher bypass be more efficient? Is then most of the time on the high altitude too?
That's correct, but when you think of an airliner sitting on the ground and all the weight that it has, all those people on board, so with the high bypass fan, the fan is doing pretty much all the work down below. There's a lot of power coming off of that fan to move that weight. And once it gets up to altitude, and then the fan's not doing much at all. And in fact, the fan speeds up. Because we didn't talk about split spool and free turbine jet, but this fan actually frees up and just allowed to spin up there because there's hardly any resistance up there. But the core, the smaller core, is all that's needed to push that airliner through. So you can see with that big airliner with all that weight on it, all those fans get really, they really do their work down at low altitude. And that's what makes it so efficient.
They don't go up as high as like the smaller corporate guys do anyway, though.
That's correct, depending on the corporate jet. Your typical airliner like to play around 35,000 feet, 30K, maybe sometimes a little under. And a lot of your really cool corporate jets like to hang around 43,000, 45,000 foot. And those are rated for 51,000 feet, like Gulfstream. And some of the other jets are 51,000 feet.
skeptical of it's better for like the sound as well as, yeah. What would be the benefit, like why wouldn't you do that to all of them? B versus A. Is there pros and cons to both?
Yeah, the one on top is what they're showing is more applicable to, like a higher bypass engine. Like, that's just gonna bypass right up to the open atmosphere. But on a low bypass engine, they have used those before on top, and they found out it's not as good as ducting them like you have today. Just about every low bypass engine you see today will be fully ducted. You'll have a nice smooth cowl on the outside. The Beach Jet is a low bypass fan engine. And of course, you have all single cowls, so there is a bypass duct between the core engine and the outer nacelle. So, and it is better. It's quieter, it's more efficient. It's more streamlined for aerodynamics. So that's, the lower one is pretty much the way to go. But they have had top ones like that before. Does that help?
Hold up. If there aren't any more questions right now, you have time later to questions. Take a break and come back at 35. Are we recording? Everybody getting partway through that loud, working their way through? Any confusion or like what in the world or this made absolute sense? Okay. So we're gonna move on, and as I said, you will have time to work on the Google Lab, so no problem if you didn't get that finished. So we're gonna be doing review and reinforcement of all these concepts as we go along. So if you start to get tired, like, I know this already, why are we reviewing it again? It's probably because students in past years did not remember it. So you're gonna review, go over, get it cemented, so when you get to your oral and practical, it's like, I know this stuff. And also, as we keep going, we're gonna be diving deeper and deeper into these concepts. So if there's something that you don't understand, stop and ask me or her, so we can make sure you have full understanding. So, what are the three parts common to every turbine engine?
Compressor, turbine.
Woohoo! You guys are learning so fast. So, yep, compressor, combustion, where we have our burning. Those gases drive the turbine, and the turbine is what then is driving our compressor, or if we have a propeller out here, whatever that's powering and the power that we need, or producing our thrust. So, the gas turbine is also known as a heat engine. So here's some concepts you need to understand. So, it's converting our chemical energy in the fuel, so fuel has energy, into heat energy. Then that heat energy, and if you remember back to physics, Mr. Boyle, as you heat air, it expands. So we're taking advantage of that expansion. That's going into kinetic energy and velocity. We're taking that velocity. So all of this is going on as we're introducing fuel in our combustion chamber. Those gases are going onto our turbine. That turbine, they're spinning that turbine, which is then, on this case, powering our propeller. And our compressor turbine is driving our compressor. So we're taking that energy, converting it into mechanical energy. The gas is transformed to mechanical energy to turn the compressor. The accessories, we're going to talk about that later, a thermodynamic cycle of operation that may be used to explain the operating principles of the gas turbine engine. Basically, to a simpler definition, the energy transformation cycle in a gas turbine engine. So fancy stuff in the previous slide where we had all this energy in the fuel, and then we combust it, and it expands. We're transforming that energy into something useful for us. And that, you can keep that in mind as we talk about everything going on in the engine. It's an energy transformation. Do we want pressure or do we want velocity? Are we extracting from the gas and making it mechanical energy? So you'll always have exchanges going on because you can't always have all the things. So here is where I'll talk about the Otto cycle versus the Brayton cycle. So the Otto cycle, Ryan's going to tell you all the things, all about it, but that's on a reciprocating engine where you have a piston moving up and down inside of a cylinder. So what do you think if we have, here's our piston and the cylinder, we're drawing it down, sucking in all our air and fuel, and then compression in that same place, piston is moving back up, compressing that fuel-air mixture. We add a spark, combust that sends our piston back down, and then our piston comes back up, pushing that out the exhaust. What do you think is going on with pressures in the Otto cycle? Massive changes. So, since this information was from Kate's class, I stole it, and he said, on average, you're seeing a difference of about 800 psi, going from very low pressure, very high pressures, all in the same chamber. So that's the Otto cycle. That's all I'm going to talk about, the Otto cycle. In the Brayton cycle, I looked up pressures on the PT6. We're going from the inlet here, or our inlet coming in on the PT6. You've got ambient pressure, whatever that is, if it's 14.7 on a standard day. And where in here do you remember where will be our highest pressure? Diffuser. Woo! You get a gold star. Or right before our combustion chamber, or right after our compressor at the diffuser. So on the PT6, generally, that's around 103 psi. So that's why Brayton cycle on our gas turbine is called constant pressure cycle. And free tidbit, the Otto cycle and a recip can be called constant volume because this piston went down, they're always going to have the same volume in that chamber. When Brian starts recips, you can just say, hey, I actually know that's also called constant volume. He'll be impressed. On the next lab, I don't know if I'll open it today or tomorrow, but your textbook is going to be super helpful. And if you go to page 1-58, Understanding the Brayton Cycle, there is a paragraph that explains it real nicely. And if you want to highlight this, if you like to highlight things, you can do that. But it walks you through what's happening throughout the engine with volume and pressure. So, now we're also going to talk about intakes and how they are shaped as a duct to help with our air. But at the intake, and you can also see in your textbook and follow along, increase or decrease? Higher pressure, good, yep. And a slight decrease in volume. Then, and this is why I pointed you to the book to do the lab, because all this increase, decrease pressure, volume, that's why I'm following, make sure I don't slip you guys up. So follow along, make sure I'm not getting off track. So in our combustion chambers, this is where we're introducing fuel, and we have all that energy. Now we're heating up and expanding those gases. But throughout here, we have relatively, constant pressure, increased volume, gases expanding. That's going onto our turbines, spinning those guys. And the turbine converts all of that velocity energy into mechanical energy and is driving our compressors out here, or propeller, or shaft, or whatever we have connected. Then we come out the exhaust, which is what kind of duct? Convergent duct. And all of this volume is expanding, pressure decreasing, converting to a final high velocity, and our equal and opposite reaction force creates thrust. Kurt, do you have anything?
Oh, yeah, I got all kinds of stuff.
I figured.
No, not really. You did a really good job explaining it through. The only thing I would add is, and I talked to Christina about this earlier, is remember how we opened up this class talking about convergent divergent ducts, and you can see it all through the engine? What I might want to add, can I just say?
Oh, yeah.
Is that you can see right here this diffuser, which is the highest point of pressure in the engine. Then automatically you're still going to go even to this whole divergent duct is all part of it, and then it goes around the combustor can, and then the volume increases so much, and so does the velocity, but the pressure tends to maintain the same, right? So here you've got, out of the combustor can, what duct do you see right here? Convergent. You're going to make velocity, because we want velocity to hit those turbines. Think of like a wind turbine out in the farm, the more higher velocity of the wind, the faster they spin. So we're creating velocity against here. We're extracting mechanical energy, but look at this duct right here. What is that? That shape is a divergent, and then look at this shape here. Here, and here. What is that? That's a divergent. And then right at the end of this tip of this cone, it goes into what kind of duct here? Convergent. You see how many times the convergent divergent is all the way through the engine? And when Christina gets into the compressor, each one of those stages is going to be divergent ducts through there. And each one of these stages is going to be convergent ducts, because we want to maintain that velocity coming out of the turbine when we extract it. So everything's going to be dependent on convergent divergent ducts. And you'll probably, we're guessing too, that when you do your oils, you're probably going to be explaining all of this stuff as it goes through the engine. Okay? Does that make sense?
How in the, can you explain how in the air intake and compression section is divergent?
Yeah, and we're going to get specific. She will get specific in intakes, and we're going to show that. When the air comes into an inlet section, the inlet section is going to be part of the airframe. Just like the tailpipe, the inlet section will bolt to the front of the engine, and that'll be an airframe item. And that's typically a divergent duct right about here. So the air comes in, it'll be a divergent duct before it comes into the compressor blades. You'll see that in the inlet section.
Any other questions? conditions or constant pressure cycle. Oh, what's Newton's third law? Excellent. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Turbine engine, acceleration of the mass of air by the engine is action. Forward movement of the engine is reaction. And you can think of it, those of you that do shooting, as a bullet fired from the gun. The bigger that is, the more recoil you're going to feel. Side story, if you ever shoot a 12 gauge pistol grip shotgun and have so much fun and keep shooting it and just have a day of it, and if you do it on Saturday, next day in church, if you're wimpy like me, you're going to be because of all the recoil. So just thinking of, for every action, equal opposite reaction. Very important to understand, we've already been talking about some of this, of Bernoulli's principle. When a fluid, or gas in our case, is supplied at a constant flow rate through a duct, the sum of the potential or pressure energy and kinetic or velocity is constant. So, energy cannot be created or destroyed. You can convert it. So you can exchange one for the other, but you can't have pressure increasing with velocity increasing unless you do special stuff. You're exchanging your energy. And temperature is also affected as a result when converting from potential to kinetic or vice versa. So that's something you have to keep in mind. When I'm working with energy, temperature is affected. And, what's curious about this one? That's right to left. But they put arrows on to show you it's different than normal. So as we go through, what kind of duct is this? Converging duct. And I don't know, it's a little hard for me to see. So what is happening with, as it is converging, what's happening with velocity? And what's happening with pressure? Very good. And then as we come to this duct, what kind of duct is this? Divergent. And what is happening to velocity? Decreasing. And what is happening to pressure? Excellent. So you got it.
How does that work as far as what Kurt was saying earlier as it happens inside? What are those labels for? Is that saying?
So we have, I believe, and you can like low pressure, low velocity, high pressure right here as we're measuring it against these walls. Then as we're coming through here for higher velocity, lower pressure. And I believe these are showing that you're taking this measurement within that chamber.
But the high velocity and low pressure changes in the convergent.
It would be
from there.
right in
Okay.
here as it's narrowing down. Is what's.
But obviously, as it comes out, if that's the same outlet diameter, it'll stay that until it hits the diverging
Right.
duct.
Right. But we're not putting any outside change on it. Well, yeah, size of the duct. So, as we've mentioned, the divergent principle is used in the compressor and the diffuser. We're going to go into a lot more detail on that. And then convergent is used in the turbine to get the velocities we need. And now, our flow is left to right. again, and it also has arrows to confirm that. As velocity is decreasing and pressure increasing, temperature is going to increase. So that's something you have to think about, especially on the day when you design your own engine. How much temperature increase can your component handle? And we're going to talk about what is the hottest part of the engine later. And then, as velocity increases, pressure decreases, temperature decreases because it's relating to our pressure. Back to physics. Questions on that? So here is a graph, two graphs of what is going on where in an engine. So we have volume, increasing volume this way, pressure increasing this way. So we're going to start here at compression. So at the beginning of our engine, at a certain volume and pressure. As the air gets compressed, volume drops a little bit and pressure shoots way up because that's what we want with our compression. And then with combustion, slight drop in pressure, but we're really building up that volume with the expanding air. And then expansion out through the turbine and the nozzle till finally we get back to ambient condition. So that's comparing volume, pressure. Over here we have our pressure curve with temperature and velocity. So here we have the actual diagram of the engine. At our air inlet, we're starting off with ambient as our baseline. And then through our compression section, pressure, again, of course, going to increase. Temperature, slight increase. And little bit of increase in velocity. Then, through our, what's the name for this section right here? I heard it over here. Diffuser. Okay, David can't answer anymore. So diffuser at the exit of our compressor section or entrance to our combustion is, here we can see, the highest pressure. And as we go into the combustion chamber, obviously, temperature we're burning is going to go way up, and our pressure kind of stabilizes. Velocity increases a little bit. As all these gases are going to our turbines, the turbines then are drastically increasing velocity. Temperature starts to drop off. Pressure drops off till we go out the exhaust and have take all our pressure, using it for thrust. Temperature kind of stabilizes as well as velocity staying high and out with the thrust. Any thoughts, Dad? Any questions? Yes.
Let's make it the velocity goes slightly up and down.
And so this is a design of how your compressor blades and then the divergent ducts with the stator vanes, but our whole chamber outside is what kind of duct? The whole thing is kind of convergent. So we're trying to get the best, as much as we can out of both worlds. So we have slight increase in velocity. Right, because there are things we can do to help not totally deplete one to take the other. By doing cool stuff with the higher than the incoming air. Makes sense. Newton's second law, oh, I should have hidden this. Oh well, that's for you. Force is proportional to the product of mass times acceleration. So, if we increase our air mass, we get more force. If we increase the acceleration of that, we get more force. Gross or static thrust is the force the engine exerts against its mount while operating but not moving. So this is either on the stationary aircraft or testing. Static means the not moving part. Also called static thrust. And the symbol is gross thrust or force. So FG, you'll see in these formulas we're going to go through as our gross or static thrust. How about take a 5-minute break? You know, I'm meaningful. Get up, get moving, and be back at 35. out what our engine thrust is in pounds. So we take MS, which is mass airflow through the engine, and then multiply that times quantity of the air velocity at the exhaust, so what's coming out the back, and we subtract the forward velocity of the engine. So curious, as your engine moves forward, it's going to take away from your thrust. You might be like, what? We'll talk about it more. And then divide that by acceleration of gravity, which we know is 32.2 feet per second. Now, we're not going to go too deep into this stuff, but just kind of see how and why it works within the engine. So, if we need to determine gross thrust of a turbojet sitting at rest at the end of the runway, so full brakes on, with engines producing takeoff thrust, so we got full takeoff thrust going on. Takeoff power setting, 50 pounds of air are moving through each engine every second, and produces an exhaust velocity, which is one of our numbers we need, of 1,300 feet per second. So we got 50 pounds per second for mass airflow. Our velocity 1, we're not moving forward at all. Velocity 2 is 1,300 feet per second coming out of the exhaust, and 32.2 as our acceleration due to gravity. And if we put all those numbers in there, we get 2,018.6 pounds for our gross or our static thrust. Now, so just keep that, tuck that away. Net thrust, and our symbol is F, our force in for net thrust. The effective thrust developed by the engine during flight, taking into consideration the initial momentum of the air mass prior to entering influence of the engine. And we have it here. So, this is somewhat theoretical. We're going to take the same aircraft as the previous example, but now we're flying 500 miles per hour, converting miles per hour to feet per second, and we have our numbers down here, so 50 pounds per second still, but now 734 feet per second that we're going forward. Our engine is moving through the air. And our exhaust velocity still 1,300, 32.2 for acceleration due to gravity. And we get 878.9 pounds of thrust. Does anyone have any, why would that be? Something's not making sense. Why would, yeah.
Why V1 was 0 is the first question.
Yeah, so that was because we were sitting still, not moving. Now we're moving at 734 feet per second. What do you think them together for our total thrust. So back to this one. Anyone think of something that we're not factoring in when we're moving through the air and we're just calculating thrust out to net? Drag and our ram effect. Yes. So there's going to be, and we're going to talk about this later, the ram air coming in as you accelerate is going to have an effect. But this is just some calculations to see, okay, without counting that, what is happening to with gross thrust stationary compared to net thrust when we're moving forward. Any comments?
How come you need gravity?
Acceleration due to gravity.
The air is coming sideways.
I had to go back in to see why that's part of the equation. So, how do we know the force that we're getting? In the cockpit, the pilot is going to look at a torque meter, and we're going to see this in King Air when we hopefully do some runs on it. Torque is a force multiplied by its lever arm and acts at right angles to an axis. The torque meter indicator is on a turboprop or a turbo shaft cockpit instrument and used to indicate engine power output. So that because a prop or helicopter rotor puts a twisting force onto the shaft, then an electronic or it can be oil operated torque meter, which it is in the PT6, sends a signal appropriately to the torque meter. When we do the runs, you'll see what that one shows and the difference. Now I'm diving deep into stuff. When we have our prop in what's called full feather, or it's taking big pumps of air, or as it speeds up and the load decreases, what happens to our torque meter? And I'll be quizzing you on that during our run-up. So thrust horsepower in a turbojet and turbofan, and this is a calculation for in-flight only. We have a gas turbine producing 3,230 pounds of net thrust because we're in flight, while the aircraft is flying at 500 miles per hour. What thrust horsepower is being created? And we have our, now we have to figure out net thrust, put that into this equation, multiply by aircraft speed, and divide by 375, and that's just a conversion that translates the product of thrust and velocity into horsepower, so that's where the 375 comes from. And we do that, and thrust horsepower, we get 4,307. So that's kind of where those, how you would figure out those numbers. Propeller thrust, so from our turboprops, we have shaft horsepower, and this 0.8 comes from, generally, props have 80% efficiency on turboprops. And if we have shaft horsepower, 1,150, how much propeller thrust does that equal? If we're flying at 445 miles per hour and 80% efficient propeller, we put our numbers in there. Shaft horsepower are 375 and 80% efficient, and 445 miles per hour, and we get 775.3 for our propeller thrust. somewhere in excess of ambient because of the engineered design of the choke nozzle. So you're getting additional pressure. That pressure across the nozzle creates additional thrust by this principle of force equals pressure times area. So what's happening, what kind of duct is this? Convergent. So what's happening with velocity? Increasing, and pressure is decreasing, but what happens is, and this is all engineered, right here we reach speed of sound, and a shock wave forms, which forms pressure, and because we're not giving it a convergent to let it play and go beyond the speed of sound, that pressure stays there and stays above ambient. So a way that they sometimes can produce additional thrust. Any questions on that? So there is a formula to calculate net thrust with a choked nozzle. Mainly, appreciate the engineers do this for you. And you don't have to be calculating that. But again, you'd have to figure out your mass airflow, and then you still have, so this part should look familiar, exhaust velocity, and then inlet velocity, gravity acceleration, but now you have to figure out area of the jet nozzle, pressure of the jet nozzle, and also ambient pressure. But here we have subsonic velocity, and right here goes right at the speed of sound, sonic, and the nozzle length has to be engineered for that to happen properly. So this is the example of the choked nozzle, pressure remains above ambient, and this would just be unchoked.
So would that be at a set, like 100% power or something? Because if you would change the speed of the
It
engine,
should
it would
be, I believe
mess
so.
with the
Yeah.
sonic barrier, right?
Right. And they give an example. Here we go. They just work through putting all the numbers in. And 646 would be net thrust at ambient with an unchoked nozzle, but we're adding 300 pressure thrust with a nozzle being choked. So that's how much additional pounds of thrust you can get with a choked nozzle. So I'm just showing you the advantage of that. All right, moving into thermal efficiency. Hang on. Keep hanging on, high on and things. So, and again, all those formulas are just to kind of give you an understanding of relationships. You don't have to keep going on. So, thermal efficiency, we've got another ratio of the actual power that an engine produces divided by the thermal energy in the fuel consumed. So, obviously, we want to be getting as much energy out as possible. Turbines can operate with thermal efficiency as high as 50%, which might not sound great, but you can get 50% of the energy out of the fuel. Here are things that you do need to know. So 3 primary factors that determine the thermal efficiency of a gas turbine engine. Turbine inlet temperature, compression ratio, we're going to talk about each of these, and compressor and turbine component efficiency. So, and these are the same ones that were in the last slide if you're taking notes. It's fine. So turbine inlet temperature, right here, if all you can see. So coming off of our combustion chamber, we've got these super hot gases that are been on fire, hitting our, and if you can come up here on, I won't give you another break after class, but look, we have turbine inlet guide vanes, because that air is all tumbling off of our burner and straightened and directed onto our turbine. So our turbine inlet guide vanes, or the inlet to the turbine, is going to be our hottest place in the engine. So they have to go based off of that, how hot is that, to determine how hot they can burn the gases. Because it's not going to be a great day if those turbine blades crack and break or
Yeah,
melt.
one of the things you want to remember is you see up on that first line, you notice this is primary limiting factor, is underlined for a reason. I would study that hard if you see it.
Yes.
But if you're gonna design an engine, what's gonna cause you to limit how much fuel you can burn and how much heat you can impinge on the turbine blades, turbine inlet blades, is gonna be temperature. If you get too much temperature, you can start melting the blades. So that is gonna be the primary limiting factor of designing an engine and having that burn efficiency. You run as much as you can without damaging the blades.
So jot it in your notes. Write it in your brain. Primary limiting factor is turbine inlet temperature. Then we have our compression ratio, and that is higher compression ratios force more air into the engine, enabling more heat energy from the burning fuel to be transferred to the internal airflow. So we want that as high as we can without causing things to get too hot. And then compressor and turbine, the components themselves, their efficiency, that directly affects the compression ratio, which directly affects the thermal efficiency. So all these things are affecting one another, and you need them to be nearly 90% efficient to get above 20% thermal efficiency. So you all are student airframe mechanics, have been through a bunch of classes. What are some simple things you could do, or you can think of, that would help with compressor and turbine efficiency? So these components right here, they got all these blades. These guys got air coming in, hitting them. What could you as a mechanic be doing to make sure they're efficient? Keep them clean. Excellent. Inspect them. Make sure they're not breaking down. And we're going to talk about compressor washers and all that stuff and climates to operate in, but yes, you want to keep them clean and do good and thorough inspections. Factors that affect thrust. You're going to have a lab on these, so you need to know these. You're going to be going into your textbook and some other resources to see how these things affect thrust. But we're going to go through each one of these. Temperature, altitude, airspeed, engine speed, and fan efficiency, or if we don't have a fan, compressor efficiency. The temperature, altitude, and airspeed sometimes are grouped together when referred to as stagnation density. So if you see that term, stagnation density, it just means temperature, altitude, airspeed all together. So what or how does temperature affect density? Colder, more dense. Excellent. And the denser that we temperature increases, now our thrust is decreasing. So as the air's temperature is increasing, that means our density decreasing, thrust decreases. As the density of air increases and outside air temperature decreases, thrust improves. Anyone remember what a standard day temperature is? 59 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 degrees Celsius. So when engine manufacturers are doing all these calculations for best thrust, they're using standard day temperature. So what do we do, you may ask, if we have hot outside air temperatures? So one thing that they've done is a water injection thrust augmentation system, where water, or they mix water and alcohol together and inject it directly into the compressor inlet or combustion chamber. So you got a water tank and then lines going down with little injectors. What that does is it cools that air mass so that more fuel can be burned without exceeding the turbine inlet temperature limit, which is the most critical portion. And cooling the air also increases the density of the air mass. Now it can be tricky because is humid air more or less dense than dry air? Less dense. So if it's too humid, then we're kind of fighting with each other. So on a super hot, super humid day, this doesn't have as good of an effect as if it's a dry day. But the cooling action has more effect on air density than adding a water droplet. So we're getting better effect than negative. Yes.
What's the purpose of the alcohol?
So we don't freeze.
There's been an incident where a line guy ended up putting fuel in the water.
Oh.
Yeah, it just destroyed the engine.
Mm.
Yeah, way too much fuel. I think they exceeded that temperature. Turbine.
Oh. That'd be a bad day.
That's why it's so important as an inspector to make sure all of our tanks, oil, fuel, fluidity, are properly placarded.
Yeah.
Without the placard turning off or something, if there's a line guy.
So the regular on placard are continuous. Altitude. Oh, yeah, sorry.
How's that regulated, the last one? Or the
this is a thrust lapse rate graph with our net thrust over here and altitude and decreasing, and then at 36 more of a drop off. So that's why a lot of airliners will fly around 36,000 or a little less because of that drop off in thrust for the general turbofan engine above 36,000 feet. Now, airspeed. As forward airspeed increases, air mass acceleration in the engine decreases. So if you remember back to that thrust calculation, as we add speed, that's subtracting off our air velocity out of the back of the engine. So air mass acceleration in the engine decreases with the result that less thrust is produced. So those are those two equations we did with the aircraft sitting static still and the one where it's moving at whatever it was, 500 miles per hour. We saw the loss in thrust. But as our aircraft speeds up, now we're forcing more air into the engine. That is known as ram effect. Then that results in an increase in air pressure in the engine, which does produce more thrust. So an increasing aircraft speed has two opposing results. So there is a decrease in thrust from the reduction of the air mass accelerating through the engine, but we have an increase in thrust from ram effect. Net result is ram recovery, so we have a slight increase in thrust. And here's the graph. If it's just a velocity, our thrust drops off, but with the ram effect, that brings it back, so our result is an increase, excuse me, overall increase in thrust. And, oh yes, I did want to use my hairdryer. So this is my unducted fan. So if we have, we're going to say this is, it should be a little bit lower, but our ambient air sitting still. As the aircraft engine starts to move forward, the air mass going through the engine decreases, so our thrust decreases a little bit until we're going, now this is going to be my forward airflow. We get fast enough, and I have enough ram effect to overcome the loss in forward speed. Questions on that? I like to see aircraft. Oh, okay.
everything is based in percent. Zero, obviously, is the engine's off. And then minimum idle is typically right around 55%. That can vary a little bit depending on the manufacturer of the engine. Maybe some will have 52%, some might have 56%. That's the idle speed. And the idle speed is based on, once you get this mass rotating, will it maintain that inertia? So let's say, for instance, you try to set idle at 45%, there's not enough inertia to keep it going, so it'll fall off. So the minimum on the manufacturer of these engines, let's just throw a number out there, typically 55%. So 100% is full speed. So at 55% rotation, it's idle. So now, let's say I wanted to go from 55% at idle, and I want to go up to 65%. So I have to give it quite a bit of fuel. And I'll get it up there to 65%, and I'm making just this much more thrust. Now I want to go to 75%. Get more fuel. Now my engine goes up to 75%, and I'm making a little bit more thrust on top of that. Now let's take it up to 90%. Now I'm 90%. The engine's really screaming away. It's not at full power yet. I'm making more thrust. And now I'm stabilized, and I'm making maybe this X amount of thrust. Now, from 90 to 100, if I just go a little bit more, just take it, let's say, to 95%, I get a big increase in thrust. Go to 97%, I get another great big increase in thrust. Take it up to 99%, I get another great big increase in thrust. Take it up that last percent from 99 to 100, you'll really see your thrust go up. So as you get to the high engine speeds, a little bit of throttle can give you a lot more thrust versus being down into the lower speeds, 55, 60, 65%. You know, you gotta give it quite a bit. I do have a story. We have time. We had a Hawker 800, which is a twin engine, medium size jet. And I pulled it out onto the ramp, and I tailed it into the corner of our ramp, and we had to do engine runs. And the guy said, I don't think I need to take it up more than 70% thrust for his checks. I went, great. So we got it all parked there, and I noticed there was some construction going on by our hangar behind us, and there's a porta potty there. So I thought, you know, based on, thrust and distances of the maintenance manual, I thought, should bring it. So he went ahead and took it up to 70%. It's making X amount of thrust. And you don't see much happening in that porta potty back there, so I knew it did. Well, then he says, hey, I got to take it up higher. He says, let me take it up to 75. I said, all right, go ahead. So he takes it up to 75%, and it just creates a little bit more thrust, not much. It's louder, obviously, but not that much more thrust. And you can see the porta potty just rigging. And then he says, no, it's not high enough for the checks, whatever they were doing. He said, I'm going to take it up to 80. I said, all right, go ahead. So I'm watching the porta potty. I'm not watching even him. I'm watching the porta potty. He takes it up to 80%. Now you're starting to get a little bit more thrust based on that extra 5%. And now that porta potty factor's shaking. I went, okay, it's pretty good. Then he comes back and says, it's not enough to do my checks. I got to have more thrust. And I'm like, all right, go ahead. It's not our porta potty. So he took it up to 85%, and the increase in thrust from 80 to 85% was so much more, it started really tipping that porta potty, and then eventually it went over. So you could see that just that increase of thrust, just in those 5% increments, added a lot more thrust. And based on all my calculations for porta potties, distance and stuff, yeah, we know exactly what we can do.
Oh, that's great.
Fortunately, there was nobody on that construction.
I was gonna ask this.
When they came in the next day, they were like, what?
Oh, that's great. All right, just a couple more to go. So, fan efficiency. Turbofan, again, designed to be quieter and more fuel efficient. So, turbofan jet wake or prop wake versus aircraft speed. And here we have turboprop, UHB, turbofan, high bypass, low bypass, turbojet, and turbofan low, and turbojet supersonic, all compared to each other. We got turboprop here going over to our turbofan. So just comparing. Couple things to talk about, just to introduce them to you. We're going to be talking about them a whole lot more later, especially as I go through King Air with you. An aborted start is terminating or ending the engine starting cycle when combustion, or we'll call it light off, does not occur within a prescribed time limit. So there's a whole bunch of things. This is a lot more steps to a turbine start than a piston start. And you're looking for certain N1 compressor speeds. You're looking for fuel pressure and fuel flow and turbine temperature. So as you're doing your start cycle, you're watching all of those. If anything's wrong, you have to abort, quit that start, and shut down. A hot start is when you turn the starter or going, our igniters are producing ignition, we introduce fuel, and all of a sudden our exhaust gas temperature, or on the King Air is inter-turbine temperature, shoot through our prescribed limits. Don't want damage, so shut down. An indicator of this is if you have too much fuel flow. You're getting too much fuel, which a hot start is usually caused by excessively rich mixture, too much fuel, getting too much fire, too hot. So too hot of exhaust, too hot onto your turbine inlet, you need to shut down. But on the King Air, we're watching fuel flow. If that's going too high, that's when we shut down before our hot start, temperature gets too hot. Start means we have normal light off, we hear kicking in, but our RPM doesn't come up to where we want. So on the King Air, we introduce fuel and